Darth Vader walked through the metal corridors of his fortress, his thoughts consumed by frustration. With each battle, each mission imposed by Palpatine, he felt the limitations of his own body. The suit that kept him alive also imprisoned him. Every movement was stiff, every breath a reminder of his defeat on Mustafar. At first, he believed that his master had given him a second chance, an opportunity to rebuild his power. But as the years passed, suspicion grew within him. What if that suit had been designed to limit him, to ensure that he never surpassed the Emperor's power? This idea became an obsession. Vader knew that Palpatine was cunning, a strategist who always planned several steps ahead. Was it possible that his physical weakness was part of a larger plan? He tried to find answers, but his suit's medical and technological records were restricted, accessible only to Palpatine himself. There was no doubt that the Emperor was keeping him alive, but not to make him stronger, but to ensure that he could never completely free himself from his chains. Vader was no fool. He knew that directly challenging Palpatine while he was in that state was impossible. He needed an advantage, something to compensate for his limitations. It was then, during a mission to Kamino, that he gained access to old files on the Imperial cloning project. What had once been a mere superficial interest became a fixed idea. If he couldn't improve his current body, then he would create a new one, a perfect clone, free of the weaknesses that plagued him. Upon returning to Coruscant, Vader deepened his research into the cloning process. He analyzed the records of the clone troopers and realized that the Kaminoans had perfected their techniques over the years. Clones aged quickly, but he could make adjustments to create a replica of himself in full physical form, without the defect of accelerated aging. However, the biggest challenge was not to create the body, but to ensure that the clone inherited his power in the Force. This question made him hesitate for a while, but his conviction grew every day. The perfect opportunity arose when Palpatine sent him on a new mission for Kamino. The Emperor was interested in the possibility of reactivating the cloning facilities to reinforce his army, and Vader was tasked with overseeing the process. What Palpatine didn't know was that Vader had plans of his own. During his visit, he entered the deepest laboratories of the floating city and accessed the most advanced scientific records of cloning. There, he found the key to his plan, a genetic replication process even faster and more effective than the one used to create the Republic soldiers. After completing the official mission, Vader returned to Kamino in secret. He landed his ship stealthily, unescorted, and descended into the most isolated chambers of the complex. The Kaminoans, always pragmatic and loyal to science before any government, didn't question his intentions. They knew they were dealing with a Sith Lord and the Emperor's right-hand man. Any objection could cost them their lives. Without hesitation, Vader demanded that they begin his cloning immediately, using the most advanced method available. The scientists obeyed without hesitation, aware that failure was not an option. The process began, and Vader followed each stage closely. He watched the droids assemble the capsules, adjusting the genetic settings to create an exact replica of his body before the burns. Every detail was meticulously supervised. But what Vader didn't know was that the Kaminoans had improved their technology impressively. The old clones took years to reach maturity, but now, a new method could drastically speed up development, allowing a clone to grow and become stronger in weeks. Vader was intrigued to discover that his clone would be ready much sooner than he had imagined. The process, which should have taken years, was taking place in a matter of weeks. The cloning tank pulsed with energy, and inside it, a new body formed. Every day, the clone became stronger, its muscles developing perfectly. The mere sight of his old form returning before his eyes made something inside Vader stir. He had spent years trapped inside his armor, but now he saw the chance to escape the prison Palpatine had imposed on him. Deep down, Vader knew that this was only the beginning. Creating a perfect body was one thing, but ensuring that his clone inherited his strength and power was quite another. He couldn't just rely on genetics to replicate his potential on the dark side. The real test would begin as soon as the clone awoke. He would need to train it, mold it, and above all, ensure that its loyalty was unquestionable. Only then could he finally challenge Palpatine and take what was rightfully his. As the days passed quickly, Anxiety grew within Vader. His plan was making surprising progress, but the risk was immense. If Palpatine found out, his very existence would be in jeopardy. However, none of this mattered anymore. For the first time in years, he felt he had a real chance of freeing himself from the chains that imprisoned him. Darth Vader watched the cloning tank carefully. The liquid inside it began to dissipate, revealing the silhouette of the clone in the cold mist of the laboratory. When the figure became visible, something inside him stirred. For the first time in years, his eyes met his own face. The face of Anakin Skywalker. Not the burnt-out monster who needed armor to survive, but the warrior he once was, in his full form. Strong, healthy, powerful. He didn't look away. That wasn't just a clone. It was the weapon he himself had forged to fulfill his will. The tank opened with a hissing sound, and the droids began to carefully remove the clone. Vader remained motionless, his cold eyes observing every detail. The face was identical to his old self, every feature meticulously replicated. But he wasn't lost in nostalgia. For him, this body didn't represent a lost past. It represented his absolute mastery over life and death. He had created the perfect version of himself, without the limitations imposed by Palpatine. The plan was working, and that was all that mattered. The Kaminoan scientists laid the clone on a stretcher to monitor its adaptation. Its body was fully formed, needing only a few days to stabilize its genetic structure. Vader stepped forward, his footsteps echoing through the sterile laboratory. A Kaminoan approached with a datapad in hand. "The midichlorian tests have been completed, Lord Vader," said the scientist, his voice calm and professional. "The results are identical to those of the original Anakin Skywalker." Vader merely nodded. Absolute power was right there in front of him. The only difference was that this new Anakin had no memories, no emotions shaped by the weakness of his old self. He was a blank page, ready to be written any way Vader wished. The thought of the prophecy crossed his mind for a brief moment, but he dismissed it. The chosen one? No, that wasn't a pawn of the Force. That was an instrument of the dark side, a soldier created to be the blade that would pierce the Emperor's heart. The Force didn't dictate his fate, he did. This clone would be molded for a single purpose, to execute his will and destroy Palpatine once and for all. The days passed, and when the time came, the scientists began to awaken the clone. The induced coma was broken and, little by little, his vital signs began to stabilize. Vader remained in front of the gurney, waiting. He wanted to be the first thing the clone would see when it opened its eyes. And then the moment arrived. The clone's eyelids moved and, for the first time, he faced the world. His eyes were fixed on the imposing figure of Vader, his creator. There was no confusion, no fear. There was only emptiness. He had no memories, only the ability to understand and absorb knowledge quickly. The clone moved his lips for the first time, his voice coming out firm but emotionless. "Who are you?" His speech was clear, mature. The Kaminoan advance had eliminated any fragility in the process. He was a grown man without the need for gradual learning. But he still didn't know who he was. Vader approached slowly and answered calmly, his voice distorted by his mask. "We are brothers. You're here to help me." The words were chosen with precision. There was no need to tell the truth. The clone's mind was open to being molded, and Vader would guide this process like a master polishing his masterpiece. The clone's evolution was rapid, impressive. In a matter of days, he was moving with the grace and strength of a seasoned warrior. His reflexes were almost superhuman, his adaptation to his body perfect. He didn't need to relearn anything. It was as if he was remembering. His muscles, his mind, his instinct were ready for combat. This only reinforced Vader's certainty. He had created the ultimate successor, not an apprentice, not an ally, but an extension of his own will. When the time was right, Vader began the training. Without hesitation, the clone accepted every command. It didn't question, it just obeyed. With each movement, each blow taught, he absorbed the knowledge with impressive precision. Before long, he would be ready to fulfill his true purpose. And when that day came, Palpatine would finally know fear. The training began meticulously. Vader provided the instructions and introduced the concepts of the Force, but he soon realized something surprising. Anakin didn't need anything repeated. He listened only once and, as if he already knew everything before he was even taught, he understood and developed each lesson with absurd perfection. It was as if all of Vader's knowledge was stored in his own DNA, just waiting to be awakened. This meant that his role as mentor was minimal. The clone did almost everything himself, learning and evolving at a pace that even Vader considered superhuman. Connecting to the Force was one of the first challenges, and Anakin showed relentless discipline. He would spend hours motionless, immersed in deep meditation, expanding his connection with the power that guided all things. There was no hesitation, no doubt. He didn't question Vader's teachings, he just absorbed them and took them further. His progress was so rapid that it became clear that he wasn't just an ordinary clone. He was an exact recreation of the power that Vader had lost. With every workout, every exercise, he became something even greater than his creator could have foreseen. One night, while meditating, Anakin suddenly opened his eyes and, with a puzzled expression, asked, "Who is Obi-Wan?" The question made the room seem to freeze for an instant. Vader's deep voice broke the silence. "Why do you ask?" Anakin looked directly at him and answered without hesitation. "I saw him in my meditation. His name appeared in my mind." Vader remained motionless for a moment, his mind assessing the situation. Obi-Wan's name was still inside him, like a remnant of a buried past. But that didn't change anything. If Anakin was beginning to access fragments of what he once was, it was time to reinforce his manipulation. "Obi-Wan was my master," said Vader, his voice cold and full of contempt. "He pretended to be a friend, a mentor, but he betrayed me, just like all the others, just like Palpatine." Anakin remained silent, absorbing every word. "You were created to redress the balance, to correct the betrayals of the past," Vader continued. With every word, he molded Anakin exactly as he wanted, no doubts, no hesitations, just a ruthless force shaped to destroy the Emperor. With each passing day, Anakin grew stronger. His body was already perfection, but now his mind and his connection to the Force reached a new level. His speed was impressive, his reflexes almost impossible to keep up with. So Vader decided it was time to teach him something he himself had never been able to master, due to his costume: the rays of the Force. He knew that this skill would be indispensable against Palpatine. "This will be one of your greatest assets," said Vader, watching as Anakin absorbed the instructions and immediately began to test his strength. As always, there was no hesitation. In a matter of hours, Anakin had mastered the technique and, in a few days, improved it to a level that surpassed even the most legendary accounts of his former master. With each training session, Vader was more impressed. But along with this admiration, another feeling grew inside him: envy. That creature in front of him was everything he could have been if he hadn't been mutilated, if he hadn't been betrayed. That was the true power of the Chosen One. And now he possessed it, molded to his will. There was no longer any doubt. Anakin was ready. Vader approached, his cloak billowing in the wind from the training grounds. "The time has come," he said, his voice laden with authority. "Now we will prepare for the final details. The moment to face Palpatine is at hand." But then something unexpected happened. Anakin, who had never made a request of his own, looked at him and said, "May I make a request before you fulfill what you asked of me?" Vader narrowed his eyes under his mask. That was unusual. He answered awkwardly, "What is it?" Anakin's answer came immediately, and when he said it, the atmosphere seemed heavy. "I want to see her." Vader felt a chill spread through his chest. "Who?" he asked. The clone kept his gaze steady. "Padme." That name was like a blade going through his insides. How could it? Where had he gotten that from? "How do you know about her?" asked Vader, his voice deeper, as if the surroundings had become smaller. Anakin kept his expression serene and replied, "I saw her in her tomb. I want to visit her." Vader's mind raced. Could he deny it? Could he waste time on it? No. Anakin was already ready. Nothing would change that fact. There was no time for hesitation. If this was the last request before the mission, let it be granted. The journey to Naboo was silent. Anakin asked no more questions, showed no emotion. He just waited. When they reached Padme's grave, he walked up to the headstone and stopped in front of it. For long minutes, he remained motionless, looking at the image of the woman who had once marked Anakin Skywalker's story. His eyes traced the photo engraved in the cold marble. No tears, no doubt, just silence. Then, without looking away, he spoke for the last time before leaving. His voice was firm, unwavering. "Let's go. I'm ready." The Imperial ship was cutting through space at high speed, approaching the heart of the Empire. Inside the main cabin, Vader and Anakin were facing the decisive moment. The plan had been carefully architected, and now it was time for the final adjustments. With his imposing posture, Vader explained every detail, his words laden with precision and absolute control. "You will enter the Emperor's chamber as if you were me," said Vader, walking slowly around the clone. "Keep your head down, your posture submissive. He must believe that you are there for guidance, for new instructions." Anakin listened attentively, absorbing each instruction. "Kneel as I always do. Wait for him to speak first. Palpatine always feels the need to demonstrate his dominance. When he begins to speak, raise your head, look directly into his eyes. Then, at the exact moment you realize that he has let his guard down, strike with the rays of the Force. The surprise will be total." Vader paused and then reached for something kept at his side, the final piece of his strategy. A black helmet similar to his own, but without the need for respiratory support. He held it out to Anakin. "Now, put this helmet on and kill him." Without hesitating, Anakin took the helmet, stared at it briefly and nodded before putting it on. With the mask, his presence became even more threatening. He was ready. When he reached the Emperor's throne, Anakin followed the plan exactly. He crossed the corridors of Palpatine's ship with firm steps, his imposing presence causing unease among the Imperial guards who, recognizing the masked figure, didn't dare question him. The large door opened, revealing the dark hall where Palpatine was waiting. The Emperor turned his throne slowly, a sadistic smile forming on his wrinkled face. "Lord Vader," his cutting voice echoed, "I sense a great disturbance in the Force within you." Anakin walked to the center of the room and knelt down. He kept his head down, waiting. Just as Vader had predicted, Palpatine took the initiative, raising one of his deformed hands and speaking with his typical arrogance. "I see something has changed inside you. Tell me, my apprentice, what brought you to me?" That was the moment. Without saying a word, Anakin raised his head and launched a destructive burst of Force lightning. The blast of energy hit Palpatine squarely, knocking him backwards with brutality. The impact caused the Imperial throne to spin and almost topple over. A cry of pain echoed through the hall. The Emperor's mind was spinning in confusion. How was this possible? He knew that Vader was unable to generate Force lightning due to the limitations of his armor. But there was no time for answers. Anakin lunged forward, his fury transformed into pure destruction. Palpatine raised one hand, summoning his lightsaber with speed, activating the red blade in an instant. A hand-to-hand confrontation was inevitable. The fight exploded with intensity. Anakin attacked with a speed that was impossible to keep up with, his blade moving like a blur of pure destruction. Palpatine, even though he was a master of the dark side, was forced to retreat, defending himself as best he could. But every time he blocked a blow, another came, faster, more precise. Anakin was relentless. In one swift movement, he turned his saber and, with a precise cut, severed the Emperor's right hand. Palpatine screamed in pain, staggering backwards, his expression contorted in hatred and disbelief. With no other option, Palpatine launched a blast of lightning with his left hand. Anakin raised his saber, absorbing the energy effortlessly. But at the same time, with his other free hand, he released his own, much more powerful rays. The energy blasted through Palpatine back against the wall. This time, the impact was devastating. The Emperor was exhausted, weak, his bent figure showing his imminent defeat. Anakin approached slowly, his footsteps echoing through the destroyed hall. Without haste, he brought his hands to his helmet and removed it, revealing his face. His eyes, once empty, now shone with something new. At the same time, a secret door in the hall opened and Vader emerged from the shadows. Palpatine looked at him and, in an instant, understood the truth. His gaze was filled with fury. A clone! His voice was a hate-filled whisper. Gathering the rest of his strength, he tried to raise his hand for one last attack. But Anakin didn't give him the chance. Before the Emperor could complete his gesture, Anakin raised his hand and launched one last blast of lightning, this time without hesitation, without mercy. The energy consumed Palpatine entirely. His body writhed in agony for a few seconds before finally collapsing to the ground. Inert, silence filled the hall. The Emperor was dead. Vader walked slowly over to Anakin, stopping beside him. He looked at Palpatine's charred body and then at the clone. His voice sounded calm, almost satisfied. "Well done, Anakin. You have fulfilled your purpose." But then something unexpected happened. Anakin looked up and stared at Vader. The glow in his expression had changed. Something inside him had awakened. His countenance hardened and, in a cold, determined voice, he replied, "Not yet." Vader felt a shiver run down his spine. Instinctively, he took a step back. "What do you mean?" he asked. Anakin took a step forward. His breathing was controlled, but his posture indicated something definite. "I'm not you. I'm not your instrument." He raised his saber, his eyes fixed on the Sith who had created him. "In my meditations, I saw everything. I saw what happened. It was you who killed her. It was you who helped destroy the Jedi. It was you who built this empire." Vader stood motionless for a moment, but then his hand went down to his saber. "Wait," he began, but was interrupted when Anakin activated his blade and lunged forward. The duel was brutal. Vader defended every blow, but with each defense, a new attack came. Anakin was faster, stronger. He moved like an unstoppable force, and each impact against Vader's armor caused increasing damage. Vader tried to counterattack, but each attempt was easily blocked. A sharp blow hit his helmet, cracking part of it and revealing a glimpse of his disfigured face. He staggered, falling to his knees, his breathing faltering. Anakin raised his saber, looking at the fallen figure before him. His tone was not one of hatred, but of conviction. "I'm sorry for what happened to you," he said, his voice firm. "But all the evil you represent ends here." Without hesitation, he drove his saber into Vader's chest. The sound of the blade scorching the armor echoed through the chamber. Vader's body shuddered one last time before falling forward, lifeless. The Empire had lost its two leaders in a single night. Anakin remained motionless, watching Vader's fallen body. Somehow, he felt that a part of him was there, defeated by the tyrant who had shaped his existence. But there was no time for reflection. Without hesitation, he put his helmet back on, erasing any trace of his face, and tried to get rid of the bodies of Vader and Palpatine. The past was dead. Now he had to go his own way. He boarded Vader's ship and programmed the destination he had been seeing in his visions for some time: Tatooine. Arriving at the cave where Obi-Wan was hiding, Anakin entered without hesitation. The shadow of his figure filled the space, and the moment Obi-Wan saw that black armor, he stood up, his hand instinctively going to his lightsaber. Before the Jedi could react, Anakin removed his helmet, revealing his face. The shock on Obi-Wan's face was instantaneous. "Anakin, it can't be." His voice carried awe and disbelief. Anakin took a few steps forward, showing no threat. Obi-Wan reached for his saber, but hesitated. "I'm not him," said Anakin, his voice firm. "I won't harm him." He then raised his own saber and, with a slight gesture of his hand, gently floated the weapon towards Obi-Wan, who caught it with a look of astonishment and caution. Anakin then sat down on the floor of the cave and began to tell his story. Obi-Wan listened in absolute silence, his eyes attentive to the young man in front of him. The tone of voice, the posture, the features, everything was reminiscent of the Anakin he had known, but something was different. He didn't have the intense flame of anger or the pride that had consumed him in the past. What Obi-Wan saw, there was something different, an almost ethereal presence. Anakin didn't carry the weight of his predecessor, but an immense emptiness, as if he was still discovering who he really was. The conversation went on for hours. At first, Obi-Wan remained serious, just listening. But gradually he began to relax, telling stories of the old Anakin, memories of the time when they were friends, battle partners, brothers. That moment was as surreal as it was unexpected. At a certain point in the morning, Obi-Wan looked at Anakin and said, in a softer tone, "Why don't you get some rest?" For the first time, Anakin accepted someone's invitation without it being an order. He lay down and closed his eyes. Meanwhile, Obi-Wan remained awake, watching the sleeping young man. He walked slowly to the entrance of the cave, gazing at the starry sky of Tatooine. Perhaps the Force was giving them another chance. When morning came, Anakin awoke to find Obi-Wan watching him. Before he could ask anything, the old Jedi said calmly, "It's time to fill that void. Come with me." Anakin followed his master without question. They walked to a small house nearby. Owen Lars appeared in the doorway and, when he saw Anakin standing next to Obi-Wan, his face lost color. Fear and mistrust were evident. Obi-Wan, however, smiled slightly, conveying reassurance. "Bring the boy," he said. Owen hesitated for a moment, but then went back into the house. Moments later, he returned carrying a 7-year-old boy with curious eyes and an innocent expression. Obi-Wan bent down and, with a gentle tone, said, "Luke, this is your father, Anakin Skywalker." Time seemed to freeze. Anakin looked directly at Obi-Wan, confused. In his visions, he felt Vader's grief at the death of his son. He believed that Luke was lost forever, but there he was, alive in the flesh before his eyes. Luke stared at him without fear, without judgment, only curiosity. And then something changed inside Anakin. For the first time since he woke up, he felt something real. A smile appeared on his face. It wasn't a planned gesture or a mechanical reaction. It was real. For the first time, he felt that he really existed. After this encounter, Anakin still had the chance to meet Leia. And still under the guise of Vader and with the guidance of Bail Organa, he engineered the end of the Empire, handing control over to the rebels and the Senate. The legacy of Darth Vader and the Emperor had come to an end. Now the galaxy could breathe again. But for Anakin Skywalker, his true path had only just begun.